Brooke Thomas. Also, thanks for watching. If you're watching this on YouTube, let me tell you about our guests today. We have two repeat guests. Janika White, she is someone who's been on this show quite a bit, thankfully. I'm very thankful for it. She's an attorney based in Memphis. Also, another repeat guest, Vincent Winston, worked in corporate America for more than 12 years at a Fortune 500 company. He is joining us from Los Angeles. And of course, we have co-executive producer, OJ Smith, and OJ is gonna lead the Out of Africa segment later on in the show. So let's get to it, because we have big news to start off with. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris made history just yesterday. Joe Biden picked the senator to be his running mate. She has now become the first Black, and why am I getting tongue-tied this, but she's the first Black vice presidential nominee of a major party in history, ever. It's 2020, but it was big news. And Biden said, I've decided that Kamala Harris is the best person to help me take this fight to Donald Trump. Of course, a lot of people feel the same. A lot of people also debating different records of hers. As far as the Senate, she has one of the furthest left voting records. People are also debating her prosecutorial record. Kind of the same thing, again, that happened during the primaries. News anchors and reporters are still mispronouncing her name. It's not Kamala, it's not Kamala, it's not Pamela, it's Kamala. Also now a big ridiculous topic of discussion is her race and how she identifies. A lot of stuff, I think a lot of just ridiculousness that you could expect. It started happening very quickly too. A lot of it's kind of icky. A lot of it is conversations that I'm glad we're having. So I want to bring you both in. Vince, what do you think about Biden's choice?
First, I just have to pause and just sit in the moment of, we have a Black woman, right, as our potential next vice president. Not only that, she's also, Asian, South Pacific. And for me, I want to really sit in the moment, because I knew what was going to happen. I knew how Fox News was going to react. I knew that it was going to be this, everything she's ever said wrong or everything she's ever done is going to be scrutinized. But I literally started to tear up in the same way I did when Barack Obama was actually elected president, because this has been such a really tough year of a lot of just crazy and bad things. But if you'd have told me when I was on the podcast last time that the presidential nominee would be Biden, I'd have been like, what the hell? And then number two, I'd have never guessed he'd have picked Kamala. I mean, yeah. And so it's just, I don't know, it's just something that makes me super excited for the future and what we could possibly do, but also just a reminder of, we have so much more work to do. Yes, it's a great moment, but I mean, we're still within 24 hours of the announcement, and look how much has been attacked already about her. And then we knew it was coming, but we have to stay strong, stay vigilant. We don't have to be monolithic in our thinking in support of her. But I think it's to a bigger point that, hey, our society is really coming together to make a true change if we decide to do so as a community.
Janika, what about you? What were your thoughts when, I know we talked a little bit, you and me, we talked on the phone a little bit, but actually we talked through voice text, 2020 for you. Yeah, thank you, Millennial.
I was ecstatic. I felt the same way Vincent did. I mean, it's just very exciting. And I think just the timing could not be better, just especially just with all that has transpired this year. And again, I mean, the scrutiny is going to be there, but it's going to be there really for anyone who's going to be in that position right now. We're just seeing it in a different way than what we are accustomed to, by the name and those things. And I wouldn't say that we're seeing it in a different way. They did the same thing with Barack Obama. And so it's kind of, when it comes to this situation, I don't want to say par for the course, but it's what has happened in the past. So I've not been surprised by the headlines and the scrutiny and those things. I'm just really hoping and really counting on, which I've seen on social media, a lot of people doing, really separating kind of these issues and whatnot, because it doesn't matter what candidates you look at this point. They're going to have some pros, they're going to have some cons. At this point, it's important that people focus on the bigger picture.
I think it's something for me that's been important. Like as far as when reporting this, right? When reporting this, when criticizing it, one, like I said, the name thing, it bothers me when people who, it's their job to, so I'm talking like national news anchors, local news anchors, reporters, it's the words are their job. It is kind of, you know, you're reminded on who is deemed not important enough to like learn their name. And also some of the criticisms, I think I was talking to a mentor this morning and she was saying that we were talking about how like there becomes this whole like toting out different Black women that are deemed more acceptable when you don't like one. It's kind of turned into this whole like listen to Black women except for the ones that I don't really like that much, which is kind of like, wait, I'm sorry, what's happening here? And also everyone I think has a short memory. So it's, oh, but I really liked this person. I would have rather been this person, but when this person was here, any Black woman in any form of public office, I think people tend to forget how they were treated in those same moments. You say you would rather a Michelle Obama, which is things that I have been seeing, but do you forget how Michelle Obama was and still is treated and talked about in the racial undertones and how she do forget? This is the same thing. And sometimes I think well-meaning people have to, and this is based on not politics or how I feel personally about a person, but just humanity, right? And like the bigger picture of how we treat women of color, Black women. Well-meaning people, some of the things that you say, you are not always able to separate that from societal norms, bad societal norms in history, just because of what's in your heart. Sometimes your words are just your words and they have the same meaning as if someone who was on the complete opposite end of the political spectrum as you meant when they said them, because words mean things. So
no, they do. They really do.
Yeah.
Sorry,
so yeah, it's okay. We lost you there just for a couple seconds. It happens. Technology, you know. All right, let's move on to our second story. The Louisiana Supreme Court just denied a 62-year-old Black man's request to have his life sentence overturned. Fairwayne Bryant was convicted in 1997 on one count of attempted simple burglary for trying to steal a pair of hedge clippers. He was sentenced to life in prison under Louisiana's habitual offender law. Just in case you're curious, prior convictions, because obviously habitual offender, he did have prior convictions, they include attempted armed robbery and possession of stolen things, attempted forgery of a $150 check, and simple burglary of an inhabited dwelling. Janika, I want to get your thoughts on not only this case, but habitual offender laws, 3 strikes laws, et cetera, all of that in general.
I think it is egregious, it's inhumane, and it's insane. It's absolutely insane. I mean, at 62, what is this man gonna do? And if he's not rehabilitated by 62, like, I mean, it just makes absolutely no sense. And I did not have an opportunity to really look into that case to kind of delve, because in my mind, I've just been saying there has to be something that I'm missing or I don't understand or that I don't know about this. But the reality is a lot of these states still have these 3 strikes laws. And it does not, and not only states, in federal court, we have the Armed Career Criminal Act. We have, and that's where when you have a felon in possession of a firearm and they've been convicted of 2 prior violent felonies, it's a 15-year mandatory minimum. And we also have the career criminal statutory guideline, whereas, like, for instance, you may have someone who for a long time have been doing just hand-to-hand sales, little misdemeanors throughout their life, you know, and all of a sudden they end up in federal court. Well, now they may have enough convictions or, you know, on their record where now they're considered a career criminal and they're sentenced extremely harshly. In federal court, it's just egregious. These mandatory minimums, these 3 strike laws, I think that not only are they egregious, I think they're applied disproportionately. And I'm saying I think, because I mean, I'm saying I think, but I'm pretty confident that the statistics support that statement, and they should just be done away with. There's no reason that under any system of law, a 62-year-old should not be eligible at this point when we're in the middle of a pandemic you know, for something, anything less than murder or rape or, you know, something extremely egregious, that person should not be released at this point for compassionate release. And the Department of Justice issued and it wasn't an order, but a letter or advisory opinion earlier on in this pandemic about compassionate release. I'm just shocked that this man was not released. And I didn't see a murder conviction on there, or attempted murder, or, you know, rape of a child, or something that really shocks my conscience as to saying that this man is just not redeemable. And it's just, it's insane. It's scary. And unfortunately, it's a lot of other people just like him.
Yeah, and can I jump in there with you, Janika? Because I really look into this, because these kind of stories, I avoid them, because what happens is I start really drilling into it and really start thinking heavily. And the first thing came to my mind, I want to start with the people part of it, because I know the story in particular pointed out that he has cost Louisiana, I think, $500,000 or something like that. And that to me pissed me off. That one sentence pissed me off, because you just monetized someone's life. And to me, what's more valuable, more important, and more significant that was somewhat missing in this article, and I know they didn't intentionally do this, I read some others that did the same thing, but what was the cost to him, his mental health, for his family? I couldn't find much if he was married with kids, but I'm sure he had mother, father, brother, sister. I think about the community. I think about the fact that he could have been a positive contributing person to society, got a job, paid his taxes. I think about all those things, and what it comes down to is that prison has to stop being treated like a business, because these pig laws, these 3 strike laws, all this stuff that is rooted in racism, that's rooted in hating people of color, or making sure that some people are below and some people are higher, has really created all these other ways for people to kind of be put back into slave-like conditions. Like this man, I actually went into this case and read the actual brief, because I was so like blown away. This man was like borrowed someone's car that needed to have a screwdriver to start it. Then the man who reported the hedge being stolen because someone was in his house, he reported him as white. That somehow got lost in this whole, trial. And then when the guy was found 6 blocks down the road, something like that, he claimed that the hedge clippers was, I think it said it was his wife's or someone else. And then he had some other things that could have shown that. And so the fact that there's even like this question of should he even been in jail, that is, I just cannot get over that. And I think the big reason why now it's even more egregious is that we have so many white people doing so many blatantly legal things in our faces every single day, starting with the top, Trump, and yet we have somebody who stole some hedge clippers who's been in jail for over 20 years. How does that make sense? And that's what really just with this article and story just really pissed me off.
But not only just that article, I tell Brooke all the time, one thing that it gets me going or really ticks me off daily is when I see people who have been in jail so long for marijuana charges, drug charges,
right,
especially in federal court. And then it's like across the bridge over here in West Memphis, Arkansas, some man is sitting at a counter selling it, legally and paying taxes on it. And we're still locking people up. Like people are still losing freedom over marijuana. Like here in Memphis, I can't tell you how many times somebody calls me over a possession charge of marijuana. And you go less than 20 miles across this bridge and you can get you a prescription, whatever it is, and a card, and you can buy it legally. And it's just this idea of, and I think, it just continues to make you have this feeling of almost helplessness, because it's like, what can you do? When it's like something is so blatantly and obviously wrong and no one is fixing it, it's like, what do you do? And just like you said with Trump, if he was the CEO of any company or a president or an attorney or any place in the world, this man would have been out of a job 30 times over, 100 times over for the outrageous things that he's done, and it's just, but it's like, what can you do? It's like, we have these rules in this democracy that I feel like, it just does not work. It sounds good. We've been made to think it's good, but it does not work. And it definitely does not work for people that look like us. That's a fact.
Vince, I think it's interesting that you bring up the cost and kind of how that's worded, but also something that's always been fascinating to me is usually people who are big proponents of long sentences, they like the death penalty. There are also people who are small government. That's what they want. They want small government. They want lower taxes. And it's fascinating that the amount of money, taxpayer funds, that these long sentences, that the death penalty costs so much money compared to life in prison. It's fascinating that how those two things contradict. Many people are advocates of lower taxes, but willing to pay for this.
Yeah, I think
that's always been fascinating to me.
Cognitive dissonance is literally, like, that's the definition of it. It's, you're holding these two you can't have both those beliefs. They just don't work. You can't be, like kind of what you said, Brooke. I think what it really goes back to is, I think we have a problem in this country with really addressing kind of the root cause, because again, going back to all this, why is there a need for some people to be in jail? Why have we never fixed these things? And I think right now we're seeing those things crumble. Am I hopeful it will continue? Yes, but I think it goes just realizing that we as a people, we as a community have to know our power, have to know that we have to put the right people in office. We have to pay attention to the different levels of government, because also in this story, which I forgot to mention, was the only judge of, I think, the 6th or 7th Supreme Court Justice of Louisiana, the Chief Justice is a Black woman, only the second in history in Louisiana to ever get to be on the court. And then the other ones were white males, and they all voted except one abstained, and all voted to say no. And it's just, that's an example of the fact that we have to have more diversity. We have to have more people that look like us in those roles, in those positions, because that's why I think the Kamala Harris put in that VP opportunity was such a powerful moment, because that really elevated Black women's to a level that we have never seen in this country before. And I think that's going to trickle down over time, whether it's through inspiration of other Black women, whether it's getting people to run for local offices. I really do believe if she gets into office and does a good job like she's always done so far, that's going to help overall, because we know Black women get the job done.
Black women do get the job done. I like what you said there.
Yes, I'm sorry.
I like that. I like what you said there. Let's move on to our third.
I was just going to say, we just as a people have to be more intentional about our goals, I think, and collective about what it is that we're trying to achieve. Because I think one thing that we also have to recognize that I've just kind of become a little bit more aware of in the last couple of weeks, I took on that case here in Memphis, and is that, we root for people, but as soon as anyone says, this person did this or this person did that, they're immediately guilty and villainized. And a lot of times, and I'm not going to say it's necessarily the fault of the Black community, but a lot of times we take on these ideas that have been implemented over all of this time, which I think goes back to the point that Vincent made earlier, and which was a great point that I never even thought of, is they talked about how much it cost the system for this man to be incarcerated, but it didn't discuss what we missed out on as a community from his possible contributions, or what we missed out on as a community from his children, or if he had children, their lack of having a father in the home. And so what we're dealing with now is just the long-term effects of that. And we have to understand that we're going to have to be really intentional in reversing that mindset, and not only other, races and people, but of ourselves, as to how we view ourselves. Do we see, and that's something that we've been spending a lot of time on in terms of the bar associations, is implicit bias. And that's just simply where, a judge may have, and we've been seeing it directly. Fortunately, we had a judge here recently who called out our prosecutor on it, where he had a case with the exact same facts. But in one case, they chose to not charge the white defendant with a gun, and they charged the Black defendant with the gun. And he forced the prosecutor's office to come before him and explain, and you have to keep this in mind, in federal court, the prosecutor has complete discretion. And so that was huge for this judge to say, I need someone to explain to me why I'm looking at the exact same thing here. And the prosecutor's office chose to to indict on a gun on this case, but not on this one, which added like a mandatory 7 years.
Wow.
But my thing is, imagine how many times that happens, and it just happens. Right. We're not really gathering statistics and data in that kind of way. And the prosecutor has, extensive discretion, but just not in just that sense, but just you know, having people who are not only there for the purpose of being, you know, for the purpose of bringing diversity, but who understand what their actual goal and their mission should be in being there, if that makes sense. You know, not to say, hey, I have a seat at the table, but I'm just going to take on all of, you know, I'm just going to help you maintain the status quo.
That reminds me of a story. I think it's called Kids Behind Bars. It's on Hulu right now, but I watched the full season, and essentially it's about grown-ups who received life in prison without the possibility of parole or death sentences as children. And after the Supreme Court decision, are working. It's showing kind of like the process of working with attorneys on. You know, the Supreme Court decision said that it basically said almost all life in prison without the possibility of parole sentences for children are unconstitutional. And I say almost because there are so many technicalities when it comes to different state laws that people are slipping through the cracks, right? And one of the stories was about, I don't remember if it was an armed robbery, if there was a murder, an attempted murder, and I feel bad that I don't exactly remember, but there were 4 kids in a car, 3 white kids and a black boy. The 3 white kids had been committing crimes all day long. They were on a crime spree, which is like, sounds like a comic book story, but they've been doing stuff all day long. They pick up this black kid at the mall, and then he doesn't know what's going on, and they go and do the crime that got them all in a lot of trouble. And what happened was 2 of the kids were way too young. 2 of the white kids were way too young. So they couldn't be charged as adults. The other 2, the black kid and the last white kid, the white kid, they ended up offering him a deal because they didn't feel like they could convict a tiny white guy, but they could convict the black guy, who was the only one in the situation who didn't even know what was going to happen. He did get convicted, and everyone's out of prison except for him. And it also like reminded me of things that we feel like were unfair when it comes to like how our parents treated us, things that we weren't allowed to do because of, I don't know, the ability of you to get in different trouble than other people, or you know. But that just reminded me like of what you just described, Janika, like how often those things happen, and it comes down to a lot of times like prosecutorial decisions. Like, I don't think I can get a conviction on this with this guy, but I can definitely get it on this guy just based on this. And
I think that's a good example of just, I remember when I first started practicing law, I remember I used to tell my brothers, and I don't even know if this is a politically correct statement, I don't know.
It's okay.
But I used to tell them all the time, I have 3 brothers, I'm the only girl, but I would tell them, the system is not there. So what does that mean? Don't get in the system. Like, don't get in the, like, don't do it, like nothing. But unfortunately, the more I practiced, I realized that the way this thing is set up, they could be following my sound advice and still somehow end up in this god-awful system that we have. And I just think that it is, for us to be touted, you know, as the leading country, or at some point we were, I don't know what people consider us at this point, but for us to be, you know, supposedly the world leaders, we have failed miserably as it pertains to just being humane. You know, we've allowed these rules and these laws and these regulations to allow chaos to exist, to allow these disparities to exist, for us to treat people like they're less than human. I mean, you know, just for instance, that Louisiana case, I don't care what the case law looks like, honestly, to be honest. That is a case where that man should be out of jail. That case that you just described with that kid, I don't even know all the facts of it. That is just, that should not be. That should not be. But the way that cases are presented and the way that we follow these rules, most people probably would never even understand that full picture of that story. Do you see what I'm saying? But for someone doing a documentary on it, we would only know this kid was involved in a robbery and now he's in jail for all of these years, but we would not have the context in which he was there, which is really the most important thing when it comes to sentencing. It doesn't matter whether he's the one that was convicted. Okay, what was his culpability? What was his criminal intent? What was his culpability in comparison to other actors? That's what's fair. That's what's right. And it's like some kind of way we've gotten so far away from just what is simply fair, what's simply right. And the stuff that goes on some kind of way because we've justified it with rules and regulations. Somehow the stuff that wouldn't even fly in your home with your kids passes the test in our criminal justice system because it's a rule that we have or have had for all of these years.
That's a good point. All right, well, let's lighten things. I guess I can't even say lighten things up. It depends on, I don't even know how this conversation is going to go, but our third story today, actor Ryan Reynolds, he's married to actress Blake Lively. He says they are deeply sorry. They feel sorry for getting married on a slave plantation, a former slave plantation in South Carolina. In part, he said they are deeply sorry and, quote, what we saw at the time was a wedding venue on Pinterest. What we saw after was a place built upon devastating tragedy. It was in 2012, not too long ago. I see these things, and I see these things all the time. Unfortunately, like this was a celebrity couple, right? But a lot of people, plantations are big poppin' wedding venues. And it's wild because they also are, not to mention like they have a history of rape, other violence, murder, people in chains. They're also like often slave grave sites. I don't want to go to a wedding there. I don't want to go to a party there. Of course I don't want to get married there, but people do. My question, Vince, I'll start with you. I don't know, like, do you believe that you can visit a plantation and maybe like in this day and age not know what it means?
You want to go?
Either one. Because
I just say I don't think it's necessary you don't know what it means. I think that and this is where I think we go wrong as a society. And I hate to take it here for a second. This is where I think we go wrong in general. Is we tell people how they should feel. We tell people what should be okay and what should not. And that's not fair. And it's not right. You every day, you have discernment of your own. You have convictions of your own. You make decisions for yourself. And, I could see that to say this was an old whatever land. It's probably gone through several hands from here, whatever. It's a big, beautiful house, some big, beautiful land. And, and some anti-slavery people. So my point is, right now, it could be in a completely different condition, whatever. I think that's up to them, and they should not be villainized for it. And I think it was silly for him to apologize for it. What are you apologizing for? I think that's somebody's preference. I think, and what I care about is if he called somebody the N-word while standing in line. What I care about is if he has a Black person at interviews, but he doesn't hire him because he's Black. That's what I care about. I don't care that he had his wedding at a slave plantation. And I think that's the problem. We tell people how they're supposed to think and how things are supposed to look when it comes out versus focusing on what's on the inside. Because the thing is, you can be well taught. And that's the problem we have. That's why you have people hiding behind white sheets and they're the CEOs and all these things, because people can be well taught based on all of our criticisms. People can easily learn, oh, that's appropriate. Oh, that's not appropriate. Oh, this is, and so what you end up with is a bunch of actors. And you don't know what's on the inside of people. And I guess some could say, oh, well, that says on the inside they're racist or whatever, and that's somebody's entitled to come to that conclusion. But I think we focus so much on boxing people in by one action or inaction. This person should have spoken up when this happened for this person. Well, heck, you don't know if they were on the phone and they made 10,000 phone calls for him, but they never came out and spoke on it. We have to allow people to be who they are in whatever way that they are. And I just think that I understand what it means. And I agree. I wouldn't want to go to a wedding there. I wouldn't want to have my wedding there. I wouldn't want to go to anything. I don't want to visit one, even for historical purposes. I just don't want to have anything to do with that. But I think that that's part of our problem is in terms of overreaching as to whether or not them doing that was okay or not. You know, when it's not something that's an overt act in the sense of, you know, who they are as people or where their heart is or those things, you know, even though I guess people can make that jump or that leap,
right.
You know.
No, and I get what you mean. I also do love, and it is always like to remember, like to try to have like grace with everybody, because like you pointed out, like we all have discernment. We all fail at that often, every day. Thank goodness that we are allowed to bounce back from things. I do think overall in this country, there is a lack of seriousness when it comes to issues about anti-Black racism and slavery. And I think that all trickles down into modern day behaviors, because no one would ever get married or even desire to get married at a concentration camp, at a site of former, and even hearing that, like we know, even as Black people, how horrifying that would be. Like, do you not know anything about the Holocaust? Like the idea that anybody would want to get married at a former concentration camp is delusional to us. But at a former slave camp,
concentration camp is just the only
they're
difference is one is pretty and one isn't.
One's pretty, yeah. And I think that I do wish overall, while I do want to have grace with people and understand that people have different thoughts and beliefs about things, I do wish that what started with slavery and how that affects many of our decisions, whether it come to, you know, our educational institutions, our healthcare system, many different beliefs. I wish that it was taken a little bit more seriously, just overall in society in this country. And I think if it were, that would not be a decision that anybody would make.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with you, Brooke. And yeah, kind of had 2 points on this. You know, number one, and kind of exactly where, you know, you ended at, Brooke, was I think because we've never truly reconciled with our slavery past, and we have not dedicated sacred and hallowed grounds to where, you know, this is a dedicated site, museum, maybe even like made sure the bodies were preserved correctly, just doing the humane thing, which I sort of see a theme here of things, even with the lady antebellum changing her name and how the antebellum has been so romanticized and for non-Blacks pretty much. And so when I read the story, I actually wrote down, why was this article a story? Why was it newsworthy? Because I actually, again, I went deeper because I know that I like Ryan Reynolds.
We love a research king.
Lightly, so I had to go.
I know, right?
Yeah.
I'm over here like, tell me more.
Because I was so curious. Half the article was them apologizing for something that happened in 2012, and he made this comment. It's impossible to reconcile. He said, "Well, we saw the time was a wedding venue on Pinterest and all other stuff." And I was thinking, like, what was else going on in 2012? So I looked and couldn't find anything. But then I kind of dug into another article that talked about this, and I'm sorry, the actual Fast Company article that this was actually built off of, where he was kind of exposed, or he had talked about or whatever. And I found that they've actually done a lot of other stuff, such as working with the NAACP Defense Fund. They've donated a bunch of money, and they've actually been doing a lot of work, and they made it a point to teach their kids everything. Like I read some article, or I think it might have been the Fast Company, where they wanted to make sure their kids was raised, and that they made a point to make sure their kids knew that they made a mistake and that they were working to get better and do those things. But as I was going through it, I started to come to this conversation about white fragility again. Because at some point it mentioned that he doesn't feel comfortable talking about it because he doesn't want, because sometimes white people can talk about race and get drowned out other voices and all that. And I was thinking, here we go again with this same white fragility thing. White people are always so afraid to talk about race. They're always so afraid to admit their mistakes. They're always afraid to get labeled as a racist. And it's kind of irritating because I feel like I'm not going to get to the point where I'm going to, you know, pacify white people when they start acting that way. But I get a little worried when people go so far. Like I kept trying to figure out, why was this such a big deal to Ryan and to Blake? And I get that was maybe their own awakening that they needed to jump into but man, I was thinking, can we find not from this article, but I'm thinking like, Ryan Reynolds, this should not have been an article because it's not that big a deal. I love that he's grown and evolved from that. I wish they'd have spent like 70% article talking about what he does, his companies, what they've done with their children and what learned they've done, versus them talking about them getting wedding. And by the way, this is what made me so white fragility jumped out, because I read somewhere that they were so distressed by what they found out that they, you know, got married on plantation. They got married again at their own house like a couple years later, just so they could feel better. Like, I don't want white people to worry. That's not what I want you to worry about. I want you to worry about, are you making sure black people who look like me are getting jobs? Are you making sure you stand up for them when we're not in their rooms? Are you making sure you're creating opportunities for us? Like, I don't want this to be these answers. Like, I excuse me for getting so emotional, but
no, I
refuse
respect
to be
it.
Post 1965, where we did such a great job as a people and we got the country paying attention, but then we got, shitted on, and we got these lazy ass and crappy fixes. And this is an example of just a lazy, and this is not toward them, but just in general of, we need bigger and better things. And this is not going to change my opinion about them one way or the other. I will say I love what they did outside of that, but come on, we cannot let them run with this narrative anymore. They got to do much, much harder work and more.
I don't mind this being a story at all. And I think that's not necessarily need to be a story, but I think it goes to show the amount of disrespect and how overlooked we are. And for them to care that much, and for this to actually be a story with them, and then for them to actually care that much, it kind of brings to me light that people get married on plantations, and other, white people who may care or may not have even thought like, hey, that's offensive. I think this article will help that be on their mind to help stop a lot of the disrespect that we get, because this plantation shouldn't really be there in the first place. Maybe as a historical site that nobody goes on because there's a bunch of dead bodies there, kind of thing, or because it represents, like Brooke said, you don't get married in a concentration camp. Like, nobody gets married at Auschwitz. So I think that even like the smallest speck, because this is wild disrespect at the end of the day. So even the smallest speck of disrespect needs to be addressed, because the smallest disrespect being addressed, that means you can't get away with the bigger things. You can't get away with the things that you guys are saying that are more important, because we're respected on even the smallest level. We're thought about even on things that might not make change, but show respect. Show that, like, why would I do that? That means, I have black friends. My black friends would be offended. Like, I don't like what happened to them. Why would I get married there? But things like that just aren't even, as you can see, on the most, this guy donates to the NAACP, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And these things still aren't on his mind. And so these things do need to be on, I don't want to say just white people, it needs to be on everybody's mind. Anybody who would get married. Plantations, they do look nice. The houses are beautiful. I like architecture. The landscaping is nice or whatever. But people, if the respect was there, then it wouldn't cross anybody's mind to ever get married there or ever see it as anything that could possibly be okay for any reason other than a historical site or something along those lines. Not something like, hey, we're going to spend the rest of our life together. Let's commemorate it at a place where, basically a black concentration camp.
I think we can walk and chew gum. I think that's something too, like, that I think is brought up a lot, like, especially now, when like little ridiculous things are happening. So it's like, they paint Black Lives Matter. And that is frustrating when what you're asking for is a deeper look at police brutality, right? So things like that, absolutely. But being thankful that a celebrity donates to the NAACP and also wanting them to not glorify a place that as celebratory, a place that, its only function was to harm Black people, and make money off of those harms. But I don't know. I wish that we could get there. The Knot, which is like a wedding planning site, Pinterest, they have taken plantations off of their like wedding venue list, which totally seems like such a small thing, but not necessarily an unnecessary thing. I don't see. I would like all of the things that we find out as adults, and I say this a lot, that are rooted in slavery or like anti-Black racism, all of the little things. I would like my kids to grow up and that not be normal to them.
Well, I would love
that.
I just have a thought or a question, and I'm just playing devil's advocate a little bit here. Let's say, for argument's sake, they took one of these plantations and they plowed it to the ground and they built a mall there. Are we the same offended if people go to the mall there? Because
no, not at all. If they raised it and built a mall there, would you build your mall there? Probably not.
I wouldn't, but I'm asking. I guess what I'm trying to say is,
no, I don't think we would.
The only reason I'm asking is because I think that when we start making arguments like doing it there is disrespectful of those things, that's so subjective. And I think that if you probably polled 500 people of different races and ethnicities, I bet across the board, they would be split about whether or not that was disrespectful. And I mean that even for the group of Black people. I could probably go find you a whole bunch of Memphians who be like, that doesn't bother me, and of course, here in this platform, you all are very aware, you all are very, on top of what's going on, you're informed. Right. You see what I'm saying? You're informed, you have an understanding, you have a deeper thought process and meaning. And I think that when we start fighting or it causes this division over things that are like subjective versus really focusing on more things that we could be intentional and in agreement about. Does that make sense? And I'm not saying that it's like a non-starter, because I absolutely understand OJ's point, of saying, hey, the small things lead to the bigger things. And I don't disagree with that at all. But I think we have to, in general, and when I say we, Black people have to, in general, we have to come to some consensus about, what is offensive to us collectively, or what things that we collectively, want to change and don't want. And I think we can, all agree, of course, on, police brutality and those things. But I just think that but that's the thing, we don't all agree on that. We don't even all agree on the N-word. That's one of the greatnesses about, like, I think this show, and why I wanted to have this show, is that we are different. Blackness is not a monolith. And there are things that you and me, Janika, you and me, Vincent, you and me, OJ, like, think are horrible, that you will find lots of Black people, because white supremacy is so deep rooted in everything that we've learned about life growing up in this country, that you will always find people who are okay with the norm. Yes, there are probably Black people who have gotten married on slave plantations, but everything about, I think that's the issue, is that anti-Black racism should stop being subjective in all forms. Right. It should just be, hey, was slavery bad? Okay, let's act like that. Let's act like it does when it's other marginalized communities and the atrocities that they face. Let's stop glorifying really bad things. I think slave plantations existing as a way to go is like a bit of a museum, go and see, talk about what happened there. And a lot of them do exist based on that. And then you get a lot of complaints as over the years they've started to actually focus on the slavery and actually call it what it is. You get a ton of complaints from people who don't want to be brought down when they're trying to see this like beautiful thing. And people don't even want to be educated about things. Everything about our basic humanity is subjective in this country. It just is, coming from everybody. And I struggle with that.
And I think that goes back to the fact that we've never really reconciled with race, and kind of going back to, I think all of this kind of, if you zoom out, it goes to the fact that we've not reconciled with race and slavery in our country, because using that point about, I think there was a story of like someone complaining about the plantation was talking too much about slavery. No one will go to Auschwitz and say, y'all talking about too much about these Jewish people dying. Like that going back to, we've never reconciled it. And I think until we take it to that level, these things will continue to happen. And I don't know how to fix that. I just think that everything that OJ said, I agree with. Everything Janika said, I work with. Everything Brooke, you said, I agree with. I keep coming back to what can we do to address it? Because I don't know if the plantation is a storyline that is important right now on the list of how they treat us,
I respect that. But how are you going to agree with all of us? Now you sound like those people who like big prison sentences but don't like
think we're all,
No, I'm just joking.
Because we're not, because what we're saying is really not also different. And I'll give you, but this is what I mean. And I agree with Vince. I don't know how to fix it, but I think that at some point, yeah, we're not going to all agree all the time, but at some point we're going to have to start reaching some kind of agreements to get any kind of movement forward. And I think and I actually think you can agree with all points, because I agree with what OJ said, and I actually agree with what you said too. You made some great points. And I think that what you said was absolutely true, that our country is just so deeply rooted in white supremacy that a lot of things are just the norm and a change of the way we think as a whole. And some people are just a lot, further along with that mind change than others. But, like one example I can give you just happened here in Memphis, Flight, the restaurant we used to love to go to.
Yeah.
So Flight, Coastal, it's like 4 different restaurants owned by the same people. And it came out that the owner, one of the main owners, was just extremely racist and had like blatantly said, he didn't want Black people working at his restaurant.
One of the blackest cities
even told,
ever.
Right. And he wanted them to not seat Black people at the door. When people walk by downtown, he asked that they seat Black people upstairs. And just also that he was, misogynist as well. But the long and short of it is, people protested for a little while and those things. And I still have not stepped back foot in a restaurant. And this happened a little bit over a month ago. But the fact of the matter is, so many people here, my friends and so many Black people were like, well, I'm still going. They always treat me well at Flight, so I'm still going to go. And so, of course, that caused a big rift between us, because I'm like, how? Why? When these people won't hire your child, or if someone comes in that doesn't have your status, or that doesn't look, like they have money like you do, how are they going to treat your kid when your kid comes in here? And I'm just like, you're still supporting a culture that doesn't want you,
Right.
And it doesn't matter that they may have hired a person or two, who's has some good character and treats you well. That's not indicative of the culture of that place. And so I say that to say, I think as long as we're still divided, and I said that to say, to piggyback a little bit off of OJ's point, and I agree, because that's the point that I made. If we're not in agreement on little things like this, like where someone has outright, flat out said, not where we have to draw any conclusion, right. This person has said, they had his former GMs came out and said, these stories are true. This is factual. And these are people who had a lot to lose. And they finally ended up, buying him out or something. But, you walk past, it's still not a Black person. It's not a Black server there. It's still not a Black hostess there. Still not a Black bartender there, at any of the restaurants. And so it just brings you to this thing of, but yet and still when you pass by, it's still packed with Black people.
I think it's the base level problem is respect. Because if they had just basic respect, we wouldn't have these problems, because they respect each other. They respect other people, or they respect whomever, but they respect us the least. And I mean, it's evident by, they kill us on camera. They don't think about getting married at a plantation. It's the littlest, every step of the way it's just proof of disrespect. Mm-hmm. I honestly think that with the invention, or with social media, that we can get to a place where we do agree on the things that we will say that, we're going to get mad over, or demand respect over, or establish some kind of baseline, because for the first time ever, Black people across the nation get to talk to each other. I see that's a lot of the reason why, Black Lives Matter and all the movements are happening, is because we all, for the first time, get to talk to each other. And we know what's going on the East Coast. We know what's going on in the South. We know what's going on here in California. We know what's going on everywhere with Black people everywhere. And so I think over time, if we really want to have these conversations, well, we should really want to have these conversations on what the consensus, everybody's not going to agree, but we can at least get the majority to say that this is what it is. Like Black Lives Matter. The majority says this is what that is. Like there are some people who don't agree, like the guy who lost his knee because he didn't want to take one. You know what I'm saying? Everybody ain't going to agree. What happens to you happens to you. But everybody isn't going to agree, and that's fine. But the majority says that Black Lives Matter, right? And so we can also reach the majority on other issues over time. But I think that maybe we need to be conscious that this is a vehicle, social media is a vehicle, that we can talk about these issues and hash them out, because I've seen a lot of things on Twitter over time. You know, the issue evolves into a place where acceptance, everybody is accepted in a space, or an issue is brought to light that nobody ever thought about or considered because said group of people was marginalized. And, you know, like on Twitter, I saw Black LGBTQ Lives Matter. And, you know, that is something that needs to be on the forefront of everybody's mind when you say Black Lives Matter, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that with social media, those kind of issues can be brought into the forefront. Everybody can talk about them. I mean, I didn't talk about it, but I see that, I didn't think about that before. But yeah, you're right. It's all Black Lives Matter. You know, everybody we all identify as something different or whichever. And, you know, we're all affected differently, but all of our lives matter, not just straight Black men.
There's so much more that I want to. I'm sorry, Adrian.
No, go. I was basically done.
No, I didn't want to interrupt you though. I thought you were done. I'm sorry.
I'm just saying that I think that social media is important in that aspect for the Black community. So like Janika was saying, you know, some of these, and Vincent, like people think this isn't a storyline, but I think it's about respect. And, you know, on social media, we can talk about those things in the Facebook comments and Twitter comments and maybe Instagram comments and reach a consensus, and a majority of Black people can come to the same perspective. Not all of us, just a majority that can take action, like when we all agreed that Black Lives Matter and we were going to do something about it.
Again, like my favorite thing about just kind of this platform is that we get to share our different perspectives. It's not the one Black person sitting at a table talking about news, and there's just like a bigger, better opportunity for you to find someone talking about a subject that completely lines up with how you feel, because we are all different. We move through this world completely different from our white counterparts, but also different from each other based on total different things. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, many different things. So I appreciate you all. Let's do Out of Africa. And if you aren't familiar, Out of Africa is a weekly segment OJ hosted, and it's basically world news, but just off of the continent of Africa, and just to kind of normalize what happens in Africa, why we, how we talk about different stories, and hopefully ways to educate each of ourselves about all the different countries that make up the like biggest continent ever. I mean,
the richest continent.
It's a big continent.
Yeah, the richest continent, the one of the most beautiful continents in the world.
Amen.
Speaking of, Kurt Etchenwald of the New York Times tweeted out, he said that you can get a COVID test with results 5 times faster in Rwanda than in the United States. We are a failed nation. Sir?
Side note, is Asia the biggest continent? Please forgive me for that.
Oh, no, the biggest. Story. Yeah. I'm sorry. Did I say the biggest?
No, I did. And I was just talking and just being like grand about Africa. But
I didn't think you said the biggest, though.
Did I not? Okay, good. I hope I didn't.
Okay.
So back to the tweet.
Yeah, I don't like this person. I just like to point out the fact that, well, I'll get to that later. He set the bar, like failure is an African nation. Like he basically just made the same shithole comments that Trump did. This is basically in line with that. So another thing I like to point out is this is this guy works for the New York Times, right? And this just goes back to the level of disrespect that I say that these people have for us, just on a, basic, just ingrained level, that this man sees Africa as, or any place in Africa, as representing failure, when clearly this African nation is addressing this problem better than us, and we're all agreeing that we're not doing a good job. If we're not doing a good job, how does Rwanda then represent failure? How does that represent a failed nation? I think it's wild, disrespectful, and that leads to the disrespect that they have for us here.
There's too much
amazing.
Huh?
Oh, were you about to say, Brooke?
No, you go.
No, I was just about to say that is so amazing, OJ's perspective. Because in my mind, I thought, okay, Rwanda, who doesn't have a lot of resources, and that when he said it, that's what I thought. Honestly, I was like, oh, Rwanda doesn't have a lot of resources, and they're able to respond. I know they, are like, I would not think that they would have the same resources or whatever at this point, in terms of their redevelopment and all those things, that they would have, similar or equal resources to the United States. So when I heard the comment, I thought that, and it's interesting, and it's so interesting to hear how OJ, it's interesting to hear that spin on it. And when he said it, I became offended. And I was like,
yeah, a lot of you were offended.
Messed up. But
yeah,
but that again shows you, though. But I think that in of itself shows you what we've been talking about this whole time, as to just how different people, but I understand completely OJ's point, and I actually take on that point now. Like, I have his position versus my original thought. But my original thought was exactly what I just said.
Well, let me tell you this then. Rwanda has one of the fastest growing economies in the world. One. Two.
And see, that's something I didn't know.
Right. Two, Rwanda is one of the cleanest countries in Africa. I've seen videos of life in Rwanda. It's nice there. Like, the streets are clean. It looked like any American or Europeans. I can't remember the name of the capital right now. I always get it confused. But the capital is nice. I mean, they've done a lot of hard work from where it used to be. And it's almost, you can hardly believe, from what you've heard, like how this guy clearly just really isn't educated, on right. But I see him as the kind of person who wouldn't even care to educate himself if this is his line of thought.
Can I jump in there?
And that's how I was about to
go for it.
Let me jump in there because this is something interesting. So today, OJ, to your point, I just want to read something he tweeted today, 4 hours ago. When GOP or Fox look at Kamala Harris and say the only reason that this talented, experienced, and an admirable woman is chosen is because of her race, shows one thing: they only see race. They can never accept people of color can be successful because of who they are and their accomplishments. So it's weird. He can dissect that and see that, but then miss it on the other one.
Yeah, Africa has to, there's just too much knowledge out there, too much information out there to still be using Africa as your benchmark for failure in any aspect, any reason. And then also still using like a group of, an area that is predominantly Black people as your benchmark for failure, just basically on what type of energy you want to put out in the world. Like, you know what I mean? I think, it's weird that we still do that. And yeah, it's just,
it's wild, disrespectful, but
thing, and it still happens regardless of the country.
I was about to say, I think and I guess maybe because I'm an analytical thinker and maybe because I'm a lawyer, but see, actually where I found the disrespect part was kind of to what you said earlier, about Senator Harris, which was that, well, now VP'd, but what you said about her was in that when you're a reporter, you're supposed to do your research. And actually, before I made a statement like that, just in general, and maybe it's because of my background, I would have looked up exactly the facts or the statistics that OJ just gave me before I made such a comparison, and especially a New York Times journalist. And so I think that does kind of go to OJ's point of the disrespect. And now I feel really disrespected and I feel offended But even more so now, it just from the idea of what you said earlier, like that's something that should have been looked up. Like I would have never made a comparison or a statement like that without knowing, you know, the information that he just provided clearly from Michael.
Yeah. We're going to stop being surprised when Black people have it together, regardless of what struggles exist, regardless of, like, this country is a great country, right? This country is not a perfect country. And we have to stop judging other parts of the world based on the idea that we are perfection. And True. I think that, that's where I stand with that.
I guess on that same point, I think about it from like kind of using like sports as an analogy. It seems like, you know, when a team is ranked in like the top 3, right? That's when like all the pressure focuses on them. But it's like, and then that's when it's like either they're gonna do really good or really bad. And I think that's when you fall down to like 9th, 10th, 11th, that's when you really see their grit and determination. And I feel like we've sat at number 1 as America for so long. We've had that title for so long. And this pandemic has really tested that because you're seeing other countries' infrastructure and systems outperform ours, right? And so it's one, and I think that's just something that
it's so crazy that the whole continent, they try to talk about testing, but the whole continent of Africa has less cases than the United States. And you can talk about, oh, they don't have testing, but they don't have full morgues like we have either. Yeah. Like if it was a problem with the healthcare situation they have set up out there that's set up for Ebola, mind you, that you would, if they had a problem with COVID, then they would have full morgues. If they was having problems with this virus, they would have full morgues, but they don't. And you can say it's not testing all you want, but I mean, the fact of the matter is you don't, 1, have full morgues. 2, their numbers are lower than ours as a continent. That's lower than ours as a continent. And so how is that? What's that? One more time?
Trade relationship with China. So China spends a lot of time in Africa. So they have just as much traffic to Africa as we do, if not more.
Right, if not more. And so they were still able to contain and maintain. I mean, they have cases, they have increased cases, they have deaths, but it's a lot more under control than it is here. They had it more under control than they did in Europe as well. And so it's kind of wild how that can be the bar for the lowest possible, you know, as bad as you can do.
All right, you guys, before we go, I want to give you the floor, Vince, to pitch anything you want us to know about, any social medias. You know the drill. You've been here before. Let us know.
Yeah, I'd say right now I'm in a very interesting place, and so a lot of things are changing. All I will say is Breonna Taylor murderers definitely need to be arrested and face justice. So please, if you could, whatever you can do, if you can donate, if you can spend time learning about it, whatever you can do, please understand that story and try your best to make sure that we don't let stuff like that happen again. And if you want to contact me, you can reach me at Vincent@thegayblacktraveler.com. I have no social media at this time.
All right. And Janika, we lost Janika, which is, I mean, it happens when in a pandemic, you can't be in person. It would be hard to be in person with somebody who's in a complete other state too, but technology sometimes fails us. Right. But I just want to say on her behalf that Janika's professional Instagram is Legal Rights with J. White. And she's a really big proponent of you knowing your civil rights, being aware of your rights and what's going on around you. And I think you all should follow the page and check her out. And thank you all for listening, watching. Oh my goodness. However you're consuming this show, we appreciate it. Make sure you subscribe, give us a review, and share this with your friends. I'd really appreciate that.
Leave a comment too. Tell us what you think. Leave some feedback.
Yeah, I'm a comment creeper if I have the energy. Because sometimes the comments will send you off. Sometimes. All right. Thanks for listening.